There is a specific feeling of power you get when you look through a $5,000 thermal scope. To the naked eye, the Arkansas River Valley at 2:00 a.m. is pitch black. You can't see 5 feet in front of your face. But through my lens, the night is alive. The trees are gray, the ground is black, and anything with a heartbeat glows a bright, burning white. We call it owning the night. My brother Gage and I weren't out there for sport. We were out there for a paycheck. The farmers in the Ozarks pay us good money to remove feral hogs. Hogs are like locusts. They destroy crops, tear up fences, and reproduce faster than you can count. We thought we were the apex predators in those woods. We had the high-tech optics, the suppressed rifles, and the Kevlar-vested catch dog. We thought we were the ones doing the hunting. We were wrong. We didn't know that while we were watching the field through our scopes, something else was watching us from the tree line, and it didn't need batteries to see in the dark. "Contact," Gage whispered. I didn't need him to tell me. I already had them in my crosshairs. My name is Ryder. I've been hunting feral hogs in Arkansas since I was 12 years old, but tonight felt different. The air was heavy and still. It felt like a storm was coming, even though the sky was clear. We were parked on a ridge overlooking a massive peanut field. We were sitting on the tailgate of my truck, our rifles resting on tripods. I adjusted the focus dial on my scope. The blurry white blobs in the distance sharpened into distinct shapes. It was a sounder, a herd of hogs. "That's a big group," I whispered back. "I count 30, Gage said, scanning left to right with his thermal monocular. "Maybe 35. Look at the sow in the front. She's massive." He was right. The lead female was huge, glowing bright white in the center of the field. She was rooting up the soil, completely unaware that 2 barrels were pointed right at her chest. "On my count," I said, settling my cheek against the stock of my AR-10. "I take the big sow, you take the stragglers on the right." "Copy," Gage said. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly. This was the part I loved, the anticipation, the absolute control. In the thermal scope, the world is quiet and simple. There is just the cold ground and the hot target. I moved my finger to the trigger. I felt invincible. We had the best gear money could buy. We had suppressors that made our shots sound like whispers. Nothing in these woods could stop us. Or so I thought. 3, I counted softly. 2. I tightened my grip. 1. But before I could pull the trigger, the entire field changed. The massive sow didn't wait for the bullet. She snapped her head up. The whole herd froze. In the thermal view, I saw 30 glowing white heads turn instantly toward the dark woods on the far side of the field. Hogs are tough, they aren't scared of much, but these hogs looked terrified. "Wait," I whispered, lifting my head off the scope for a second. "Why are they running?" "Ryder," Gage said, his voice dropping an octave. "They aren't running away from us, they're running toward us." The Arkansas River Valley is a different world at 2 in the morning. To the naked eye, it is just a wall of black humidity and the sound of a million crickets. But I wasn't using my naked eyes. I was looking through a pulsar thermal scope mounted on a customized AR-10 rifle. Through the digital lens, the darkness vanished. The peanut field turned into a grainy gray landscape. The trees were cold, dark shadows, and the living things, they glowed. "Scan left," I whispered to my brother Gage. Gage was standing next to me on the tailgate of our truck, holding a thermal monocular up to his eye. Behind us, in the heavy-duty dog crate, my catchdog Gunner whined softly. The American bulldog was wearing his Kevlar cut vest, ready for a fight, but I told him to hush. Tonight was about precision, not a chase. We were here for a paycheck. The local farmers were losing thousands of dollars in crops to feral hogs every week. These weren't the pink pigs you see in a barnyard cartoon. These were wild beasts, 300 pounds of muscle, sharp tusks, and bad attitude. They moved in packs called sounders, destroying everything in their path like a plague of locusts. Our job was simple: eradicate them. We were equipped for war. My rifle was chambered in .308, a heavy caliber round that could drop a deer at 500 yards. On the end of the barrel was a suppressor, a silencer, about the size of a soda can. It didn't make the gun completely silent like in the movies, but it killed the muzzle flash and muffled the boom. It made us feel like ghosts. "Got 'em," Gage said, his voice low and steady. 200 yards out, near the creek bed. I swung my rifle barrel slowly to the right, the tripod swiveling smoothly. The white-hot glow of heat signatures filled my display. It was a massive sounder. I counted at least 30 of them. They looked like glowing white boulders moving through the peanut plants. In the center of the group was the lead sow. She was huge, probably pushing 400 pounds. She was rooting in the dirt, tearing up the farmer's livelihood, completely unaware that death was watching her from the ridge. I settled the rifle stock into my shoulder. My heart rate didn't even jump. We had done this 100 times. We had the range. We had the technology. We felt invincible. "I'll take the big sow," I murmured, my finger finding the trigger guard. "You take the ones on the right flank." "Copy," Gage whispered, the metallic click of his safety coming off sounding loud in the quiet night. I exhaled slowly, watching the digital crosshairs settle on the sow's glowing white chest. It was going to be an easy night, an easy paycheck. I started to apply pressure to the trigger, waiting for the break. I never pulled the trigger. Just as my finger tightened, the lead sow snapped her head up. She didn't look at me. She didn't sniff the air for our scent. She looked back toward the thick timber line behind her. "What is she doing?" Gage whispered, his eye glued to his monocular. "Spooked," I said, keeping my crosshairs on her chest. "Wind must have shifted." But the wind hadn't shifted. It was blowing right in our faces. We were downwind. They shouldn't have been able to smell us. Then the chaos started. Usually when you shoot a hog, the sounder scatters like a grenade went off. They run in every direction. But this was different. This was a wave. The massive sow let out a sharp, guttural grunt, and the entire herd turned as one unit. They didn't run away from the tree line. They ran toward us. "Whoa," Gage yelled, pulling his head back from his optics. "They're charging." Through my thermal scope, the field turned into a blur of white streaks. 30 feral hogs, weighing hundreds of pounds each, were sprinting full speed up the hill directly at our truck. My heart hammered against my ribs. I lifted my head. I could hear them now, the thunder of hooves on the hard dirt, the frantic squealing of piglets, the heavy breathing of the boars. "Get in the bed," I shouted, grabbing my rifle. We scrambled back toward the cab, bracing for impact. I expected them to ram the tires. I expected them to attack. But they didn't. The herd split around the truck like water around a rock. They didn't even look at us. They were running so fast that one of the smaller pigs clipped the bumper and tumbled, but it scrambled back up and kept running. They weren't attacking us, they were fleeing. I watched them disappear into the darkness behind us, heading toward the county road. They were terrified. I have hunted hogs for 20 years. I have seen them fight dogs, bears, and trucks. I have never seen a hog run from anything without a fight. "What the heck was that?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Why did they run toward the humans?" Usually we are the scariest thing in the woods. Animals run away from the truck, not toward it, unless the thing behind them was scarier than we were. "Ryder," Gage said. His voice was different now. It was tight. "Look at the woods." I turned back to the field. It was empty now. The chaos of the stampede was gone, leaving only the silence of the night. I settled back behind my rifle and looked through the thermal scope. I scanned the edge of the timber line where the hogs had been rooting moments ago. At first I didn't see anything, just the cold, gray trees. Then Gage grabbed my shoulder. His grip was hard. 12 o'clock, he whispered. "By the big oak tree, something huge just stepped out." I adjusted my focus knob. The image sharpened. A heat signature appeared at the edge of the woods. It was glowing bright white, burning hotter than the hogs had. "Is that a bear?" I asked. "No," Gage whispered. "Bears don't stand like that." He was right. The shape wasn't on all fours, it was upright. It was standing on two legs, stepping out of the brush with a slow, deliberate movement. It was massive, tall and wide at the shoulders. My brain tried to make sense of it. A person. No, it was too big to be a person, and no person would be walking out of a briar patch in the middle of the night without a flashlight. "It's not a pig," I said, a cold chill running down my spine that had nothing to do with the night air. "And it's not a man. The only thing in the woods with less fear than a feral hog is an American bulldog bred for catching them." Gunner was 90 pounds of white muscle and scar tissue. He was wearing a heavy Kevlar cut vest, designed to protect his neck and chest from razor-sharp tusks. He spent most of his life in the back of my truck, waiting for the moment I unclipped his lead so he could do the one thing he was born to do: pin a hog to the ground. Usually, Gunner whined when he saw pigs, but as that massive, upright heat signature stepped out of the tree line, Gunner didn't whine. He let out a low, vibrating growl that shook the metal siding of the truck bed. "Gage, check the dog," I said, my eye still glued to the scope. "He's acting weird," Gage muttered. "His hackles are up. I've never seen him like this." The creature in the woods took another step. That was all it took. Gunner didn't bark. He just launched himself. He was tied to a heavy D-ring in the truck bed with a thick nylon lead, but the force of his lunge was like a cannonball firing. I heard a loud snap, the sound of a metal carabiner failing under extreme stress. "Gunner, no!" I screamed, dropping my rifle. It was too late. The white bulldog hit the dirt running. He didn't look back at us. He didn't hesitate. He locked onto the scent of the intruder in the woods and went into drive mode. "Gunner, here!" Gage yelled, whistling frantically. "Heel, Gunner, heel!" You can train a dog to sit, stay, and shake hands, but when a catch dog smells a fight, their ears turn off. It's tunnel vision. Gunner thought he was charging a big boar. He thought he was doing his job. He had no idea he was sprinting toward a nightmare. "He's not listening," Gage shouted, panic rising in his voice. "He's closing the gap." I couldn't see the dog with my naked eyes in the pitch black. I scrambled to grab the Garmin handheld unit from the dashboard. It was a GPS tracker linked to Gunner's collar. I stared at the small orange screen. The black arrow representing Gunner was moving fast across the digital map. He was crossing the peanut field, doing 30 miles per hour, heading straight for the timber line, straight for the thing that was standing there. "I can't get a shot," Gage yelled, trying to track the dog with his thermal monocular. "The grass is too high. If I shoot, I might hit the dog." I watched the screen. 100 yards. 150 yards. "Turn around, buddy," I whispered to the screen, my stomach twisting into a knot. "Please turn around." The arrow didn't turn. It kept going, closing the distance to the edge of the woods. 200 yards. Then the movement stopped. It didn't slow down. It didn't circle around like a dog trying to bay a hog. The arrow just froze. 1 second, Gunner was running full speed. The next second, he was stationary. "He stopped," I said, looking up at Gage. "He's at the tree line." We listened. Usually when Gunner hits a hog, you hear the impact. You hear the bark, the squeal, the thrashing of brush. It sounds like a war zone. But the night was dead silent. There was no barking. There was no growling. "Why is it quiet?" Gage whispered. "Ryder, why isn't he barking?" I looked back down at the GPS. The arrow was still there, blinking in the same spot. "Get the gear," I said, grabbing my rifle and sliding the bolt forward to chamber a round. "We're going in." There is a rule in hog hunting. You never leave the dog. A catch dog isn't just a tool, he is part of the crew. If Gunner was in the woods, we were going in the woods. We stepped off the tailgate, our boots hitting the soft dirt of the peanut field. I checked my rifle one last time, safety off, round chambered, thermal scope on. "Stay tight," I whispered to Gage. "Watch the flanks. If you see white, you call it out." "Copy," Gage said, his voice tight. We moved through the waist-high peanut plants like soldiers. The field was pitch black to the naked eye, but through my scope, it was a grainy, gray ocean. I scanned left and right, looking for any sign of movement. The silence was the worst part. Usually the Arkansas night is loud. Crickets chirp, frogs croak, and tree branches creak in the wind. But as we got closer to the tree line, the noise died. The crickets had stopped singing. The frogs had gone quiet. It was like nature was holding its breath. We reached the edge of the woods. This was the transition. The manicured farm field turned into a tangle of briars, vines, and oak trees. This was where the GPS said Gunner was stopped. Then the smell hit us. It wasn't the smell of a hog. Hogs smell like musk and old mud. This was different. It hit me like a physical slap in the face. It smelled like wet dog, rotting meat, and something sharp and metallic, like pennies. It was the smell of a zoo cage that hadn't been cleaned in years, mixed with the weird, electric scent of ozone. "Do you smell that?" Gage gagged, pulling his collar up over his nose. "Yeah," I said, fighting the urge to cough. "Smells like death." I looked at the Garmin handheld. The orange arrow was blinking just 30 yards ahead, deep in a thicket of brush. "He's right there," I whispered. "Gunner here, boy." Nothing, no bark, no rustle of leaves. We pushed into the brush. The thorns grabbed at our clothes, scratching against the nylon of our pants. I raised my thermal scope, sweeping the area. "I got a heat signature," Gage said, pointing to his left. "Low to the ground, under that fallen oak log." I swung my rifle. Through the thermal, I saw a small, glowing white lump tucked underneath the rotting wood. It was shaking. We rushed over. It was Gunner. But this wasn't the Gunner I knew. This dog had fought 300-pound boars without flinching. He was a gladiator. Now he was pressed as far back under the log as he could get, trembling so hard his teeth were chattering. "Hey, buddy," I whispered, reaching in to grab his collar. He didn't try to bite, but he let out a low, pathetic whimper. I dragged him out into the open. "Is he hurt?" Gage asked, shining his red lens flashlight on the dog. "I don't know," I said. I ran my hands over his body. There was blood, but it wasn't gushing. It was smeared all over his chest. Then I saw the vest. Gunner was wearing a dual-layer Kevlar cut vest. It was the same material used in police body armor. It was designed to stop the upward slash of a boar's tusk. I had seen boars hit this vest with the force of a sledgehammer, and it never tore. But this vest was shredded. It wasn't a puncture wound. It was a slash. 5 deep, parallel cuts ran diagonally across the chest plate, slicing through the Kevlar, the nylon, and the leather straps like they were wet paper. I stared at the cuts, my brain trying to process the physics. "A hog didn't do this," I whispered, tracing the jagged edges of the armor. "What do you mean?" Gage asked, looking around nervously at the dark trees. "Hogs slash up," I said, my voice trembling. "They use tusks, they poke and they rip." I held up the shredded flap of the vest. "These are claw marks, Gage. Something swiped him. Something with claws sharp enough to cut through bulletproof material." Gunner whined again, staring past me into the darkness. He wasn't looking at the field. He was looking deeper into the woods. I realized then why he was hiding. He hadn't lost the fight. He had been swatted away like a fly, and he was smart enough to know that if he went back for round 2, he wouldn't survive. "We need to go," I said, grabbing Gunner's collar tight. "Now." "In just a second, I am going to tell you exactly what stepped out from behind that oak tree, and the terrifying thing I saw it holding in its hand. But first, If you want to survive more Deepwoods horror stories like this every single week, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. Join the pack so you never have to face the dark alone. Now, let's look through the thermal scope. Gage's hand clamped onto my shoulder, so hard I thought he might bruise the bone. "Contact," he hissed, his voice barely audible over the ringing in my ears. 12 o'clock, behind the big oak. I didn't ask questions. I didn't look with my naked eyes. I snapped my rifle up, planting the stock firmly against my shoulder. I pressed my eye to the rubber cup of the thermal scope. The world turned back into that grainy, digital gray. I scanned the darkness ahead, pushing past the brush where we had found Gunner. There was a massive oak tree about 50 yards away. Its trunk was cool and dark gray on the screen, but peeking out from the right side of the bark was a glow. It wasn't the soft, fuzzy white of a deer or a raccoon. This heat signature was crisp, sharp, and intense. In thermal imaging, we call it white hot. It means the object is burning with energy. Whatever was behind that tree had a body temperature way higher than a normal animal. It was like looking at a furnace. "I see it," I whispered, my finger sliding onto the trigger. "Is it a person?" "Just wait," Gage breathed. "Watch." The heat signature shifted. It didn't scurry away like a frightened animal. It moved with a slow, confident swagger. It stepped out from behind the tree. My breath caught in my throat. My brain tried to reject the image on the screen. I blinked, thinking maybe the digital sensor was glitching. It wasn't a glitch. The creature was standing on two legs. It was huge. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing would have towered over me. It had to be 7 feet, maybe taller. Its shoulders were incredibly wide, bulging with muscle that glowed bright white on the thermal display. It looked like a bodybuilder wearing a fur coat. But the head was a nightmare. It had a long, tapered snout. I could see the heat coming off its breath in rhythmic puffs. Its ears were pointed and high on its skull. It was the head of a wolf, perfectly spliced onto the body of a giant man. "Ryder," Gage whimpered, "look at its hand." I lowered my aim slightly. The creature had long, powerful arms that hung down past its knees. In its left hand, a hand that looked like a leather glove tipped with knives, it was holding something. It was a feral hog, a full-grown sow, probably 200 pounds. To me or Gage, lifting a 200-pound animal takes effort. It takes 2 guys to drag one into a truck bed. But this monster was holding the hog by a back leg, dangling it in the air like a wet rag doll. The hog was limp. Its heat was fatting, turning a dull gray on the screen. The creature stood there, perfectly still, staring right at us. The thermal scope couldn't show me the color of its eyes, but I could feel them. It wasn't looking at us with curiosity. It was looking at us with recognition. It knew we were there. It knew we had guns, and it didn't care. It squeezed the dead hog's leg, and even from 50 yards away, I heard the wet crunch of bone snapping. It was a show of force. It was telling us exactly who owned these woods. "That's not a wolf," I whispered, the rifle shaking in my hands. "Wolves don't stand up." The creature tilted its head, letting out a low, chuffing sound. It dropped the dead hog. The carcass hit the ground with a heavy thud. The monster took a step forward, its massive, backward-jointed legs absorbing the weight silently. It wasn't hunting the pigs anymore. It had found something more interesting. The silence didn't break, it shattered. The creature threw its massive head back and let out a sound that I felt in my teeth. It wasn't the high-pitched howl of a coyote or the bark of a dog. It was a roar, deep, guttural, and vibrating with bass. It hit me in the chest like a physical punch, rattling my ribs. Gunner, who was already shivering at my feet, let out a sharp yelp and tried to crawl between my legs. Then the creature moved. It dropped the dead hog. The carcass hit the ground and the monster launched itself forward. It didn't drop to all fours like a bear does when it charges. It stayed on two legs, pumping its arms like a sprinter. Ryder and Gage screamed, "Drop it." My training took over. I didn't think about what the thing was. I didn't think about the biology or the impossibility of a 7-foot wolfman. I just saw a threat closing the distance, and my brain switched to combat mode. I settled the digital crosshairs on the center of its glowing white chest. At 40 yards, I couldn't miss. I squeezed the trigger. Thwip, thwip, thwip. The suppressed AR-10 bucked against my shoulder 3 times in rapid succession. The gun didn't bang. It just hissed, spitting out hot brass casings into the leaves. I watched the impacts through the thermal scope. A .308 round is a heavy bullet. It travels at 2,600 feet per second. When it hits a hog, it delivers enough kinetic energy to knock the animal flat off its feet. I have seen it drop 400-pound boars instantly. I saw the bullets hit. On the thermal display, they looked like tiny flashes of superheated light splashing against the creature's chest. I expected the thing to fold. I expected it to drop into the dirt, sliding to a stop. It didn't. The creature stumbled. The force of the impacts knocked it back a step, twisting its upper body to the left. It grunted, a wet, angry sound like air being forced out of a tire. But it didn't fall. It shook its head, growled, and regained its balance in a split second. It looked down at its chest, then looked back at me. My stomach dropped into my boots. "It didn't stop," I whispered, the realization freezing my blood. "Gage, it didn't stop." The creature roared again, louder this time, filled with rage. It dug its claws into the earth and accelerated. It wasn't hurt. It was just mad. "Run," I screamed, grabbing Gunner's collar with my free hand. "Fall back to the truck now." "Fall back," I screamed, my voice cracking. I grabbed Gunner by the handle of his shredded Kevlar vest and hauled him backward. He didn't fight me. For the first time in his life, the bulldog wanted to leave the fight just as bad as I did. We spun around and sprinted back the way we came. Running in the woods at night is a nightmare. Vines grabbed at our ankles. Thorny briars tore at our pants. I held my heavy AR-10 in one hand and the dog in the other, stumbling over roots in the pitch black. "Go, Gage, go," I yelled at my brother ahead of me. We needed to get to the truck. It was 200 yards away, parked on the ridge. If we could get inside the cab, we had steel doors and glass between us and the monster. We could start the engine and get the heck out of there. But 200 yards is a long way when you are being hunted. Behind us, I heard the creature crashing through the brush. It didn't sound like a man running. It sounded like a bulldozer. Trees were snapping. Leaves were exploding. It was gaining on us. Then things got worse. Gage, who was 10 feet in front of me, suddenly skidded to a halt. He raised his thermal monocular to his eye, scanning the field to our right. "Ryder," he screamed, pointing into the darkness. 3 o'clock flanking." I didn't stop running, but I swung my head to look. I didn't need a thermal scope to know what was happening. I could hear it. To our right, paralleling our path, something else was running through the tall peanut plants. It was moving fast, way faster than us. "And 9 o'clock, Gage yelled, spinning to look at the left side of the field. "There's another one on the left." My stomach turned to ice. It wasn't a lone monster, it was a pack. Wolves hunt in packs. They don't just chase you, they coordinate. One pushes from behind, driving the prey forward. The others run along the sides, closing the net, waiting for the prey to make a mistake. We were the prey. I looked through my scope for a split second as I ran. The image was bouncy and blurry, but I saw them. 2 more glowing white heat signatures were streaking through the field. They were moving like blurred comets, low to the ground and incredibly fast. They weren't just chasing us, they were cutting us off. "They're beating us to the truck," I realized, watching the heat signatures curve inward. They were going to intercept us before we reached the ridge. If we kept running for the truck, We would run right into their jaws in the open field. We would be surrounded with nowhere to hide. "We can't make it," I yelled, pulling Gunner to a stop. "Gage, stop, we can't make the truck." "Then where do we go?" Gage shouted back, his face pale in the moonlight. "We can't stay out here." I looked around frantically. The woods were full of monsters. The field was full of monsters. The truck was too far. Then I saw the silhouette of a jagged roofline against the starry sky, about 50 yards to our east. "The barn," I pointed. "Get to the tobacco barn." We hit the door of the old tobacco barn at full speed. Gage slammed his shoulder into the rotting wood, and the rusty hinges screamed in protest before giving way. We tumbled inside, collapsing onto a dirt floor that smelled like dust, dry leaves, and 50 years of decay. "Close it," I yelled, dragging Gunner in behind me. Gage kicked the door shut. There was no lock, just a rusted latch that looked like it would snap in a stiff breeze. We scrambled in the dark, grabbing an old, heavy wooden curring rack that was leaning against the wall. We dragged it across the floor and slammed it against the door, jamming it under the handle. "Lights out," I whispered, panting hard. "Don't give them a target." We sat in the pitch black, our backs pressed against the far wall. The barn was ancient. The wooden siding was thin and warped, with finger-width gaps between the vertical slats to let air dry the tobacco. Outside, the night had gone silent again. "Did we lose them?" Gage whispered, clutching his rifle. "No," I said. Then we heard it. Sniff, sniff, huff. It was right on the other side of the wall. A heavy, wet nose was pressing against the cracks in the wood, inhaling our scent. I could hear the coarse hair of the creature brushing against the siding as it moved. It was slowly circling the building, testing the perimeter. I raised my thermal scope to my eye. Because the barn walls were slatted with gaps, the thermal image was terrifying. The wood blocked the heat, but the cracks didn't. I saw them. They were like glowing ghosts. I saw flashes of bright white heat moving past the gaps in the wood. One past the east wall, another past the north wall. "There's 3 of them," I whispered, my voice trembling. "They're circling us." One of the glowing shapes stopped right in front of the door. I saw the heat of its breath puffing through the cracks, looking like white smoke on the screen. It knew exactly where we were. It was just figuring out how to get in. "They're testing the walls," Gage said, raising his weapon. Suddenly, a massive impact shook the entire barn. Dust rained down from the rafters. Wham! The creature at the door had rammed it. The heavy curring rack we used as a barricade slid an inch across the dirt. Wham! It hit it again. The old wood of the door splintered. "They're going to breach," I yelled. I swung my rifle toward the door, but the barrel was too long. In this tight space, with the debris and the darkness, the 20-inch barrel of the AR-10 was clumsy. If they got inside, they would be on top of us before I could swing the gun. Then the attack came from the side. To my left, near the dirty window, the wall simply exploded. There was no warning. 1 second the wall was there. The next, a massive, clawed hand punched right through the rotting wood like it was cardboard. Splinters flew everywhere. The arm was thick, covered in coarse fur and muscle that rippled under the skin. It wasn't reaching blindly. It was reaching for Gage. "Get back," I screamed. The hand swept the air, its black claws, long and curved like scythes, missing Gage's face by inches. It grabbed the strap of his backpack instead. The creature roared from outside, pulling hard. It was trying to drag Gage through the wall. "Ryder!" Gage screamed, flailing as he was yanked backward toward the hole. I couldn't use the rifle. The angle was too tight and Gage was in the way. I let the AR-10 drop to its sling on my chest and ripped my sidearm from the holster on my hip. It was a Glock 20, chambered in 10, a round designed for stopping bears. I stepped forward, pressed the pistol toward the gap in the wall, and pulled the trigger. Boom, boom, boom. The sound of the pistol inside the small barn was deafening. It was like a grenade going off. The muzzle flash lit up the room in strobe light bursts, revealing the terrifying, snarling snout of the creature through the broken wood. The bullets hit the arm at point-blank range. The creature howled in pain, a high-pitched shriek that shattered the night. It let go of Gage's backpack and ripped its arm back out of the wall, leaving a jagged, gaping hole in the side of the barn. "Reloading," I shouted, though I couldn't hear my own voice over the ringing in my ears. We huddled in the center of the room, weapons trained on the darkness, waiting for the next hit. We were trapped in a wooden box, and the monsters outside had just realized they didn't need a door to get to us. They could just tear the house down. The next 4 hours were the longest of my life. Time in a siege doesn't move like normal time. It drags. Every minute felt like an hour. Every rustle of a dry leaf outside sounded like a monster preparing to charge. We sat back to back in the center of the dirt floor, staring at the walls until our eyes watered. Every time a shadow moved across the cracks in the wood, we fired. Bang! "Did you hit it?" Gage asked, his voice rasping. "I don't know," I said, swapping magazines. "I think so." But we were shooting at ghosts. The creatures were smart. After I put the 10 rounds into the alpha's arm, they stopped trying to smash the barn down. Instead, they played with us. They paced back and forth. They scratched the wood. They chuffed and growled, keeping our heart rates spiked, waiting for us to run out of bullets. And we were running out. "I'm down to 1 mag, Gage whispered, checking his rifle. 20 rounds. "I've got 5 shots left in the Glock," I said, "and half a mag for the AR. We were losing the war of attrition, but the ammo wasn't our biggest problem. Gunner was dying. The big white bulldog was lying at my feet, his breathing shallow and wet. The blood from his chest had turned the dirt into a dark, muddy paste. He let out a soft whine, his eyes rolling back in his head. I reached down and patted his head, my hand shaking. "Hang on, buddy," I whispered. "Just hang on." Then the color of the world changed. Through the cracks in the east wall, the pitch black turned into a deep, bruising blue. Then a faint line of gray appeared on the horizon. Dawn. The creatures outside went quiet. They had lived in the dark for so long that the sun was their enemy. Their eyes, adapted for night vision, couldn't handle the light. A low, frustrated growl circled the barn one last time. It sounded like a grinder chewing on stones. Then from the edge of the woods a single howl rose up. It wasn't the aggressive roar from earlier. It was a signal. It was a call to retreat. We heard the heavy thud of footsteps moving away, fading into the deep timber of the creek bottom. "They're leaving," Gage whispered, sagging against the wall. "Wait," I said. "Give it 10 minutes, it could be a trick." We waited until the sun actually crested the Ozark Mountains, painting the peanut field in sharp, yellow light. The birds started singing again. The normal world had returned. "Let's go," I said. We didn't walk out. We burst out. Gage kicked the barricade aside and I scooped Gunner up in my arms. He weighed 90 pounds, dead weight, but the adrenaline made him feel light as a feather. We sprinted for the truck. I expected to see them waiting for us. I expected an ambush. But the field was empty. The only sign they had been there were the massive, clawed footprints dug deep into the soft soil, footprints that looked like a man, but were twice the size. We reached the truck. Gage threw the rifles into the backseat and jumped into the driver's side. I laid Gunner on the floorboard of the passenger side and climbed in, slamming the door and locking it instantly. "Go," I yelled. Gage turned the key. The engine roared to life. He didn't bother with the road. He stomped on the gas and drove straight through the peanut field, bouncing over the rows, tearing up the crop we were hired to protect. We hit the county road doing 50. "My scope," Gage said, looking in the rearview mirror. "I left my thermal monocular in the barn. That's a $3,000 unit." "Leave it," I said, pressing a towel against Gunner's chest. "I don't care." We left thousands of dollars of gear in the mud that morning. We left our pride there, too. As we sped away, putting miles of asphalt between us and that valley, I looked out the window at the endless rolling hills of the Ozarks. I used to look at those woods and see a playground. I used to see a place where I was the boss, the apex predator with the high-tech gun. Now I just saw a hiding place. We saved Gunner. It took 50 stitches and a lot of vet bills, but he made it. But we never went back to that farm. We never cashed the check from the farmer. We know the truth now. We can buy all the night vision, thermal scopes, and suppressors we want. But when the sun goes down, the woods don't belong to us. They belong to the Dogman, and they don't like trespassers.